Julie and Missy, do either of you want to talk? Please use the raise hand button if you do. Yeah, just let me know if you want to talk and I'll pay attention.
To the City of Kenmore Planning Commission meeting for Tuesday, December 2nd. It is 7 p.m. I'm calling this meeting to order. Clerk, please take the roll.
Sorry. Commissioner LaSalle,
Present.
Commissioner Macias,
Here.
Commissioner Olson,
Here.
Commissioner Dorian,
Here.
Commissioner Vanderland,
Here.
Vice Chair Thompson,
Here.
Chair Banashinsky.
Here. Next, we will have a land acknowledgement.
We acknowledge that the city of Kenmore is situated upon the ancestral lands of the Snohomish, Snoqualmie, Soxhawtla, Duwamish, Stillaguamish, Tulalip, Suquamish, Muckleshoot, and other tribes who are part of the Coast Salish peoples. We recognize and express our deepest respect for their enduring stewardship and profound relationship with this land, which they have cherished and protected since times immemorial. We honor the First Peoples, acknowledge their vibrant cultures, and commit ourselves to learning from their wisdom in our journey to promote justice, equity, and mutual understanding. We pledge to stand alongside these communities in acknowledging past injustices and working towards a future that respects and celebrates the diverse heritage of this land.
Thank you. Please join me in rising for the flag salute. Right, next on our agenda is public comments. Is there anyone signed up for public comment tonight?
We have no public comment tonight.
All right, moving on to the next item on our agenda is the consent agenda.
Your Honor, I move the consent calendar.
Could you say that please again, Vice Chair Thompson?
I move the consent calendar for approval.
Fantastic, thank you. I'll second that. Unless there are any objections, the consent agenda will be approved unanimously. Are there any objections? The consent agenda is approved unanimously. That brings us to the major part of our time together tonight, pros plan updates.
Thank you, Chair. So tonight we're not looking for a recommendation. We are continuing the discussion from the last meeting. The information in your packet addressed your comments, so please let us know if we didn't adequately address those comments. And you asked tonight to focus on a review of the implementation chapter and continuing on the appendices. So that's what we are prepared to do this evening. And Tom Beckwith is here, our consultant, to go through that chapter as well. So unless there are any preliminary comments, I'm going to turn it over to Todd and Tom.
That sounds good, thank you.
Okay, this is the implementation chapter as it's formatted to fit your final plan. So most of the elements are pretty much from the draft stage. So this first task is adopt the pros plan. It's pretty straightforward. This is kind of a typical thing. Goes through planning commission, then it goes to the council, and then that is the capital facilities or capital improvement plan. And we've put options rather than strategies and may rather than wills. Okay. I'll just go through it and you stop me if you have questions. I think you sent some emails. We can go over those if you want after we're done. Oh, I'm sorry, go back to task 2. So task 2 is introduced, but it's basically what we talked about before, is to allocate your capital facilities funds specified in your capital improvements program. And this is from your budget. And basically in your general fund budget, there's a list of different kinds of financial programs where you take money for parks and rec. So essentially we're just formalizing in this task. Task 3 is update your GMA park impact fees. In other words, you already have those. The key issue is to update the dollar amounts, and then council can look at just what % of that they want to charge. We're not making any recommendations in this. We're basically saying simply update it, and that would be up to council. Task 4.
Tom, can I make a comment about task 3, please? I heard some council commissioners talk about removing the imperative, which you did in task 2, but it remains in task 3. It says council will adopt. Is that something that should be may?
Where in task 2?
Task 3.
Oh, will adopt? Sure, that's optional. Whenever you do your pros plan, you update these. That's all part of the process, but we can use may. Anything else? Here was the Metropolitan Park District. Instead of adopt, we included consider. And in the appendix is a full text on the definition of what a Metropolitan Park District is. So you can see considers in the action. I think one of the questions was, what impact would your Metropolitan Park District have with the fact that you've got a North Shore? And I don't have an answer for that right now. Task 5 was again the levy and consider. And again, the full definition of the levy is in the appendix. And we're saying could rather than may. And there's, probably should explain 2 definitions of a park levy. You can do a park levy that's sustained if you're developing a recreation center, for example, and you ask the voters to update the property tax levy. And if you do, you specify the amount you're trying to raise and for how many years. then you issue a revenue bond on the levy proceeds rather than a GO bond. And then basically that's how you finance a facility outright. If you're doing minor projects, then you can use the kind of reoccurring 7-year levy. And then in that 7-year levy, which is a maximum amount of money that you can generate, then you can do everything from trails to minor park projects and so on. And then you can renew that every time that it expires. So you have two different ways of using levies. They both require voter approval, but they're 50% versus there's no minimum turnout.
Vice Chair Thompson?
However, the levies are still maxed out by the city maximum allowed under state law, correct?
All levies, all property tax levies are combined, yours and every other agency that can charge a levy. And when you hit that maximum lid, then everybody has to reduce the amounts they generate from that. Now, you also have a maximum on your city, but you have a combination of all taxing districts as well. Did
I
explain that?
understand, so, but
Our
the
seat-
point is that we still, when we initiate the levy for, say, a park district, just to say, we are in a position where we cannot exceed that value. And then to increase that value of that park district levy would, other than the 1% increase, would require a vote of the constituents, correct?
Correct. Metropolitan Park Districts, as a junior taxing authority, has a maximum lid they can charge. That's your operating levy. Now you can, even a Metropolitan Park District can put out a project-oriented levy, which would be in excess of that if voters approve it. For your city, you have a maximum amount that you can charge, you can levy for property taxes,
Right.
and you cannot exceed that. But no city is anywhere near charging their maximum levies, but property tax rates that you can exceed. But if you were to try to finance a recreation center, for example, you could either ask for that levy lid or your property tax rate to be lifted, provided you stayed within the maximum the RC allows cities to do to finance that recreation center. So yes, there is a maximum a city can charge, but there's also a maximum that all taxing jurisdictions within the area can charge: hospital districts, fire districts, all the junior taxing authorities. So even though you may be within your limit, if all those taxing authorities are added up and they exceed the maximum, then everybody has to reduce back from that proportionally to stay within the maximum lids. Did I explain that properly?
Yes, you did. Do you, or does anyone know where we stand on how close all of the taxing districts are right now to our maximum? As of this year, not projected.
For cities, you cannot exceed $3.10 per thousand assessed value.
Right, I
But I
sort
know,
of understand that, but.
but
what
you're
I'm-
only charging for the city 27%. I don't have listed what all the junior taxing districts have accumulated right now. But that is in your city budget, and the back part of the city budget list all the taxing authorities that can charge within the city, and you're nowhere near the maximum limits on that either. I just don't have that number offhand.
Right, so from a councilmatic perspective, to go above the 1%, they would have had to pass a levy retention with their budget as far as if they had not used the full 1% ever.
Well, those are two different issues. One question with the 1% is your revenue cannot exceed the,
Right.
increase of 1%. And so that adjusts for you your property tax rate every time you do a budget.
I understand that.
Okay. If you do a levy lid lift, you reset that rate, and then the 1% applies against the new reset rate.
Well, I do have, I get all that.
Okay? then what-
My question is what has the city to date, as of this fiscal year, retained as far as their allowable, I call it catch-up? Because
What
that's
they
what I mean
banked?
by Council Manic. They don't have to go to the public for that. Now, the public may not like it, but they have it retained, and you don't happen to know what the city's retained.
No. I don't. That's in your budget
Okay, fine.
document. What we're talking about is where you bank the fact that you took
Right, the
gold.
banking.
And you can retain that amount over years to a certain point. And you have banked that money, but I don't know offhand what that amount is. Sorry, it took a while to get there.
I don't know either, but I know there is bank capacity, so I don't know what that number is.
All right,
I'd have to dig in the budget too.
thank you.
Okay, what's the next task? Protect natural areas. We put in may instead of will. That gives you more flexibility. And task 7, develop the trail system. We put in may instead of will again. Under task 8, acquire and develop parks, we'd put in may instead of will. Under task 10. 9. Oh, conserve historic presence, cultural resources, may instead of will. Indoor facilities, we put in may instead of will, and in the action, we said continue to maintain the hangar building in Kenmore Senior Center and put in consider developing additional centers.
Can you go back there, Tom, please?
Number 10,
Yes.
okay. We probably should say consider developing a recreation and or cultural and or aquatic. As right now, it reads like it, they're all three are your option.
This was a place, since we already have the hangar building and the Kenmore Senior Center saying may maintain, seemed non-committal to me. I do appreciate may develop a recreation center, but the may maintain jumped out at me. I am guessing that our community would prefer to maintain the hangar building and the Kenmore Senior Center.
My mistake. Well, it should say will maintain and at the end of the senior center and may develop.
Yeah.
And the same sequence with and
Or even
and
should, city council should maintain the hangar building and Kenmore Senior Center and may develop a recreation center.
Or need to do the and ors twice. Okay. So task 11, may conduct progress assessments.
Question on
Groups
that
that would be, could be involved in doing that.
Commissioner Vanderlim?
Now, this is one where I think I like will rather than may. Like monitoring something with so much money here that's involved as well. ought to require ourselves to do on some periodic basis. So depending what the rest of the commission may see, I prefer to keep will here and to add in some sort of a required periodic adjustment.
I'm seeing some head nods. Okay, sufficient head nods for that recommendation. Do you want to include, Commissioner Vanderlyn, a time period?
2 or 3 years, but I think probably no less.
Commissioner Macias?
Is there a standard time frame that that you review, that you see these reviews and assessments on?
No, but if you do 3 years, that'd be the halfway mark.
That's what
Okay.
I'm thinking, halfway to 6.
Yeah. And the only reason, that I put May in there is it'll be up to council and you to decide who's involved in that.
I do recall, and Debbie and Todd, maybe you can remind me, that we have had discussions in the past about these assessments and the language that we used around them. My recollection is that having it be more open is more beneficial to kind of staff resources and workflows and things like that. Is that a conversation that we've had and that I'm not just making up?
No, I think you have made it more flexible rather than prescriptive for that reason. So it's a question of that you want an assessment, but you've been more flexible in terms of the when.
Commissioner Macias and then Commissioner Vanderlyn.
Maybe we put something in there, no less than, or no review periodically, 3 years, no later, something so that we can cover that.
If you're leery of looking too dogmatic, you use the word should. That would leave it up to you and council about when you initiate that.
Commissioner Vanderlyn.
Okay, we're risking getting into some major wordsmithing here. Maybe,
Commissioner Vanderlyn, can you use the mic, please?
sorry, I thought I was, okay. Maybe we can put some flexibility back into this with some language that say, Kenmore will develop a process for reviewing projects and programs identified above. We don't dictate beyond every 3 years, but we leave it open to the city council to develop what that process would look like and staff to work on what that process would look like.
Thoughts from commissioners on that suggestion? I'm not yet seeing forehead nods. Commissioner LaSalle?
Yeah, I like it. I think it's, as Commissioner Vanderlyn mentioned, it's really important seeing the amounts that are there, that there is a process that gets defined if one hasn't been defined yet. So very supportive of that addition.
Could I get a thumbs up if you agree? Yeah, Vice Chair Thompson, go ahead.
Did I understand what we're voting on?
I don't think we're quite voting. I was just seeing
You
if
know
there
what I
was,
mean.
yeah.
The understanding of
Commissioner
the
Vanderlyn, could
understanding.
you restate your suggestion, please?
Sure, and this is open for wordsmithing by other wiser folks, but I would have the language read something like Kenmore will develop a process to assess and review action on the projects and programs identified above. Add in the every 3 years.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't want to wait 6 years to see how you're doing.
Vice Chair Thompson.
Thank you. So when I read the participants list, the participants list is missing the public. So you could put it at the end of the sentence that Commissioner Vanderleen stated, something like, the progress assessment shall include feedback and participation from members of the public.
Commissioner Dorian?
Just one thing on this. I'm looking at the action that is resulting from this, and the action reads a bit like updating the pros plan. So if we're on, if that's the action, we're only going to do that once every 6 years. Do you get what I'm getting at? It's to do the work of doing the assessments every 3 years to only update every 6 years seems a little bit redundant. Maybe we need to change well, think about the action, how we're stating that in relation to progress assessments. I agree we want progress assessments, but if the only thing that comes out of that is an update to the pros plan, I don't think it's going to happen as frequently as that.
It would seem like at that point, what we would be hoping for was information about whether we were on track for implementation or whether we needed to adjust course. That's how the task text reads to me. So in that case, the action would be stay the course or adjust, not necessarily, well, I guess this is adjust measures.
Usually when you're doing your progress assessments, you're looking at the other 10 tasks. How are we doing on the trails? How are we doing on conservation? How are we doing on historical? And that can fold into when you update your pros plan, but essentially it's kind of a mid-course, how are we doing? Have we adjusted? Do we need to refine our techniques? Do we need to define our strategies or something else? Not to throw out the whole plan, just are we progressing?
In that case, I think maybe it's the vision bit that's throwing me, because that sounds like if we're adjusting the vision, I think we want to maintain the vision but adjust the strategies and implementing measures in those interim periods, and then yeah.
Correct.
Vice Chair Thompson?
Just for clarification, the comp plan element has to be redone, and which this is not, I got that, but has to be reviewed or updated. How often? Remind on this part of the plan, of the comp plan?
The state mandate is every 10 years,
Okay.
but we usually do the pros plan concurrently with the pros element, which would be 6 years.
Pros element would be 6 years, or this
Yes,
plan?
because the pros plan is a 6-year plan, and we want to make sure that the pros element and the pros plan are consistent. So we typically do the two things concurrently. So it would be the next time we would do this would be
Old.
2032.
So that automatically sets a date and time, which we don't need to worry about.
That sets the time for when we would be doing the full update. What you're looking at now is should there be a check-in point sometime between now and 6 years, and then it would be the progress being made.
I am hearing support for a check-in. I'm hearing support for the language Kenmore should develop and conduct, that the public should be a participant, and that perhaps it should occur at about the midpoint. Okay. Anything else on this task 11, commissioners? I think we can move on.
Well, I think that's it for the written language. And we had 2 emails, and if you want, we can go over those emails, questions
I'm
in the
sorry,
emails.
Tom, I jumped the gun too soon. Commissioner Macias?
I'm sorry. Can we go to task 7, participants? As I'm reading this, I see at the bottom participants, public and nonprofit organizations and property owners. The property owners feels out of place there when we're talking about trail systems. Can we remove that and just call that public and nonprofit?
Well, sure, you
It's
could put,
pub-
you could put public in there, the property owners in there, because in some cases you'd be on their property.
Okay, that's why it said public right of way, which is
Right.
different than private.
And you may implement some of those trails with easements or agreements, not through acquisition.
Okay, okay.
I didn't put in the word irritable. I just said property owners. So did you want to review what was in the emails then? Okay, you want to pull up one of them? And then where you can verbally go. All right. We have one from Michael Vanderleen. Okay, so I'm
Yes.
gonna,
Vice
I'm
Chair
gonna read
Thompson?
these.
Now, there's some emails that are being referred to that I'm not sure if all of us have copies of. So are those going to be put into the record for for the public to view? Because they're being referred to in the
Yes.
meeting, so that's what concerns me.
We can read them out. These are, I think, Commissioner Vanderland was just giving us a heads up on questions that he was planning to ask at tonight's meeting. So there's two ways of doing it. He can either ask the questions or Tom can read the questions. It's the same thing. So Commissioner Vanderland was just giving us a heads up about some of the questions that we might have time to then think about the answers.
Is
Okay,
it-
so those are the email, that's the kind of email you're talking, you're not talking
Yes.
about public emails.
No, this was an email
Okay.
from
then
Commissioner
I'm
Vanderland
okay.
to staff.
I was a little, okay, that's what you mean. Okay.
Commissioner Vanderland?
I think I can simplify this considerably because, as I said in my email, I hadn't yet read through the entire implementation section, and I hadn't heard the benefit of some information provided by Debbie related to the overlap between the North Shore and district and potential for a metropolitan park district. So the only real question that lingers in my mind is kind of the general one, which I think you've already begun to answer, which is number one, which I'll just read it to you. Seems like the finance-related tasks and actions 3, 4, and 5 identified in the implementation section are options. Could some be mutually exclusive or limit other financing options?
No, they're pretty independent. We're talking about using general funds. We're talking about impact fees. We're talking about potential for a levy. The only issue would be if you did pass a levy that would affect your general fund. But none of them preclude the other.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And I pretty much had assumed that from the way it was presented later on, when we were looking at the finance strategies, that those were all laid out. So I just want to verify that there wasn't potential there for some overlap or some interrelation there that would limit revenue for any one of these or the total. So thank you. I'm satisfied.
Did you want me to cover your impact fees? One of your questions there was where the funds for the impact fees go. And by
I was going to save that for later, but go ahead.
well, by legislation, they have to be deposited in a special account that can't be tapped for anything other than park related. And then the impact fees on a project by project basis are tracked for how long it takes to expend them. It's usually 6 years. So if you collect from developer X a certain amount of money, then it has to be expended developers X monies within 6 years from that date, somehow to benefit whatever the residents of developer X's area is.
So there's no danger of intermingling general fund with.
No, they're in their own separate account and they have to be auditable.
Thank you.
And then you asked about, do the impact fees impact levy caps or Metropolitan Park District? No, they don't. They're completely separate. Now, they are separate as park. You also collect traffic, education, and each one of those is in its own separate account. Then you asked about whether you can create an MPD if you already have one. And I don't have an answer to that because the key question would be, how was the NPRSA created and for what subject? If you had one created for pools and it was dedicated entirely for pools, you could create another MPD that does other things, but not pools. But if NPRSA is a general purpose, then you cannot duplicate it.
I think that's the challenge we're facing because in my reading of some of the documents related to the North Shore, there's a sense that this was created to be able to fund broadly, but then it says it's specifically and especially focused on the senior center and facilities. So there's a conflict there that hopefully we could have some resolution. Probably there would have to be some discussion between the city and the other park district to decide what you wanted to do with that. But there's
Legally, the question would probably go back to what did the voters vote on when they created it? And what was the language in that they
I
created?
wouldn't be able to find that.
Vice Chair Thompson?
I have spoken to, not to be quoting anyone, to members of the board of the North Shore Park folks, or whatever it's called. And this topic is a very hot topic. And there's, discussions within the board, which is a political board, about what was the intent? What does the law say they can do? And then what do the constituent municipalities feel is necessary, as well as the constituents? And there is considerable concern with regard to fighting off the management and the continuing costs of operating whatever facility they end up building, no matter what it is. Right now, they have senior centers. That's clear, and they've got issues just with them as far as money and how to put it all together. And, going out and doing something outside of that is very controversial. So I think that I think you bring up a good point. The North Shore district compared to a metropolitan district is going to be a very sensitive conversation and a development of what Kenmore would want to do, and then what would the other cities want to do also. I don't know if there are metropolitan park districts in the other cities that are covered by the North Shore district, like Bothell. I just don't know the lay of the land.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. No.
So I think both of you bring up good points with regard to what is feasible, likely, or possible.
If the vote on North Shore's Metropolitan Park District specified that they were only for seniors, then for them to do a pool, they would have to go back to the voters to amend that to allow them to expand into the pool business. And even if they did the senior centers and pool, you could still do a Metropolitan City Park District, provided you didn't do those two activities. You'd be restricted from that.
Thank you. That's what I was looking for. It seems like North Shore Park and Recreation District seems to have a very heavy emphasis on that, so senior center. And now they've added the pool, but seem to be very specific and not really getting into the full range of parks and recreation. So that's the legal interpretation, is that as long as you don't duplicate what another district is doing, you have the opportunity to do that within your own metropolitan district. There's an opportunity there, but I don't think we know enough right now to say anything like that.
Correct.
So going down, may I?
Yes, Vice Chair Thompson, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I apologize.
That's okay, just into
But-
your mic.
Okay. So let's say we follow through with develop a senior center. Okay, just say we want to follow through on that ourselves. Technically, what we'd have to do is negotiate with the North Shore Park folks, provide them with an agreement of what would want to build in Kenmore, and then we would provide them the funds and they would build it.
I'm not sure.
You get what I'm getting at?
Yeah.
If they are uniquely for the senior centers, let's just say.
Yes, they are, but they may be for the operations of the senior center, not the development of them. And sometimes some counties have built the facilities and then there's a different entity that operates them.
Okay.
Just like libraries. Most cities build libraries and then a library district operates them. So again, you'd have to go back to just exactly what was in the voting, was in the language when the public voted on it.
So we're not going to be able to answer this question tonight because we're guessing about how MPRSA was formed, what it can legally do, and whether the city could or could not do a Metropolitan Park District and how that may or may not overlap with MPRSA. So I think we've just kind of highlighted a question that before the city marches full steam ahead, if it decides to do so on a Metropolitan Park District, that we will need to address some of these legal questions.
Commissioner Olson and then Commissioner Vanderlyn. No, Commissioner Vanderlyn.
You want me to go
Yeah.
first?
Yes.
Where I was trying to do is bring this back to the language we currently have. And I don't have it in front of me right now, so I can't be dangerous enough to suggest alternative language. But I think what we want to do is capture very much what Debbie, you just said, which is what we're recommending would be that council investigate, research the potential for using a Metropolitan Park District as a funding source. Current maintenance and future projects, understanding that there are lots of questions that we're not going to resolve them before we need to sign this off and move it on. This is going to be work that's probably going to take so I think I'd like to create the here that the city would take that on, that work on and come up with a plan.
Which task is that in? Is it task 4?
I believe that is in task 4. In the meantime, let's take Commissioner Dorian, and then I want to remind all commissioners just to be really careful about speaking into your mic so that the public can be engaged in this conversation with us.
You could consider the feasibility of a Metropolitan Park District, and then that would cover the fact that it has to be evaluated.
Yep, I like that.
It's helped a lot to mitigate the imperative in this section. I do think I want to look at the first paragraph still. I've got some proposed, a proposed verbiage change in the very first section. So this would be back at the top of the implementation section. So my proposal would actually be, one change to the first sentence and a change to the second sentence. So the change I would propose to the first sentence is, following is a summary description of the major tasks proposed to effectively implement the Kenmore Park Recreation and Open Space Plan. I think that just mitigates that a little bit. And then the next one, I'm going to have to remember what I was thinking here. The tasks represent actions that would be necessary to enable the general priorities established by workshops, open houses, the survey of residents, and the survey of registered voters. Adding words is not my favorite thing to do, but I don't think the tasks directly represent what we heard from workshops, open houses, the survey, not least because the survey said don't tax us more. So I think we have to make that distinction of what we're saying here we want to do would enable what people have told us they want from their park system, but they didn't directly tell us that they wanted a metropolitan park district or a levy lift, etc. So I think it's just worth making that distinction.
Instead of the word necessary in the first line, you could use the word possible. These are possible to effectively implement. Necessary makes it sound like you have to do something. Correct.
Yeah, that's the idea of changing that. So that's where I was thinking proposed, but I'm open to what the commission think on that one. And then just the second one, I just want to be clear that obviously we've heard from the community what their priorities are, and I think the implementation section here is going to enable those priorities, but it's not a direct representation of what they said their priorities were.
Commissioner LaSalle?
I agree. Thank you for those recommendations.
Debbie, it looks like you'd like to say something. No?
I think I'm captured so in the first sentence, it was changing necessary to proposed. And in the second sentence, I'm not sure what I'm adding.
All right, let me find it again. The tasks represent actions. Let's just say, the tasks represent actions that would enable the general priorities. So we're just so the tasks represent, and then the words to be added would be actions that would enable. So all we're doing is adding actions that would enable there.
Commissioner Olson?
I believe in the first sentence there as well, am I correct to have heard you say you were striking determined through necessary and replacing that with proposed? So it'd be following is a summary description of the major tasks proposed to effectively implement?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. I just think I heard something different, so I wanted to make sure that was updated the way you said it.
Thank you.
So I think we've closed out that topic of conversation. Were there other email questions that came in?
We got an email from Commissioner Dorian. And I think you've talked about most of the things you wanted to ask about, but you also asked, did the previous pros plan have an implementation section? And it did in a way. On page 73, it had a list of recommendations. And the recommendations went through pretty specific projects. Then on page 81, it had a section on implementation. And it was primarily, again, kind of a repeat of projects. And then on page 83, it had funding strategies and resources. So we've taken all the funding strategies and resources and the projections of costs and put that in the appendix. And then I think we just used a different organization and said, what are the tasks necessary to implement whatever you're doing, without getting too specific into project by project basis, because we took the capital facilities program and also put it in the appendix. And the reason is then it's easier to update if you need to do that. So yes and no, there was something in the previous pros plan, but it's not exactly organized the way we do it. And yet, on the other hand, it's kind of necessary to have an implementation section of some form. Otherwise, you just have a flat plan with no progress. And that requirement is part of RCO and part of GMA.
Thank you.
Any other emails?
Those are only two that I know about.
Okay. We also have other documents on the agenda. Draft exec summary documents, Appendix F, Appendix F.2, and Kenmore ELOS.
I can speak to these two. So, at your last meeting, you mentioned you wanted to have some kind of introductory executive summary, and Debbie and I took a stab at a couple of different options and wanted to kind of get your feedback. So option one is the more short, concise version, and option two is one that I made a little bit more lengthy based on what I've seen in some other cities' exec summaries. And so kind of wanted to get your take and open to suggestions or feedback on these options.
Commissioner Vanderlyn?
Todd, I'm very appreciative of the more extensive option two. Having sat through a couple of these in the past, I know that the folklore doesn't actually get carried very well from commission to commission. And I think having this sort of learning document in here is very useful for people when we come back in 3 years, certainly in 6 years, to be able to go through this. I think it makes the rest of the document make more sense about how this all hangs together and how it's intended to hang together, and would be very good, I think, for future commissioners to be able to have this as a resource.
Todd, what page is this in our packet? Oh, it's a
300.
separate
A separate
document.
document.
Okay, that's why I'm not seeing it there.
It's listed under draft exec summary documents.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner LaSalle. Commissioner Macias?
I like the executive summary, number one. I think there is value to number two. However, the number two summary feels like the cliff notes of the entire document. And I like that it's there, but I would encourage people to read the document and find that information that's in there. It's all there. So, I mean, I like a short and sweet, concise, like this is our recommendation only. These are possible implementation plans. And that was where I think our biggest concern was here.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe too. It's a Cliff Notes version. That's kind of how some of these have read in other documents. I was just taking inspiration from some. I don't have any attachment to either one. We want your feedback. This is your document, so anything you can give us is appreciated. Yeah.
Commissioner Dorian? Commissioner Dorian, then Commissioner Vanderlyn?
I think I like the Cliff Notes version. I think because we've had trouble as a commission keeping all of the data together and understanding how it all knits together. So I think a concise way of doing that helps bring it together. Because I don't know if people are really going to read a 170-page document. And if they do, I'm not sure they can consistently pull that information together in the way that we would intend for it to be knitted together. So I think it's helpful to have that sort of guidance up front from my perspective.
Commissioner Vanderlyn and then Commissioner Olson? And
Yes, and I do appreciate option number one is more of a traditional executive summary, and I think it functions well for that. If people are concerned about having the more detailed piece up front, maybe what we could do is move it to the appendix. That in there is something that people could then reference into the future, so we save the resource, but we don't keep plodding people through from the very beginning. But I do think it's worth saving and worth having.
Commissioner LaSalle?
Thanks for writing the executive summaries. I feel equally, but for different reasons, on both executive summaries. One concise, nice, the other one more detailed and more specific to the pros plan. I think maybe for both, but the second option more than the first one, a certain number of the challenges, objections, concerns, questions, however you want to call them, from various planning commissioners with regards to how much of the pros plan was an integrated and comprehensive vision as opposed to a list of options is maybe is more reflected into there. So for example, if we go to the end of option 2, and reading the conclusion, the 2025 PROS plan positions Kenmore to enhance its park recreation and cultural systems in ways that reflect resident priorities, environmental values, and future growth. To me, very much reads like this is an integrated proposition and recommendation, which is the recent changes that we have made are moving us away from this by adding more possibilities, less than definitive recommendations. Last sentence, the plan provides a unified vision, clear priorities, and practical pathways to implementation. Very much, again, feels like this is a playbook, this is an end-to-end playbook for City Council to further parks and recreations, which, for the various reasons that the various topics we mentioned before, I don't feel it is. But I appreciate this. I think if we were to adopt one or the other, we would probably want to align the wording and the strength of the recommendation in line with the conversation we've just had with regards to the policies and various options that we're offering.
Commissioner Olson?
Yeah, I was just going to say I preferred option 2. It's a little bit more lengthy, but at the same time, it is kind of a Cliff Notes version, and I think it would be good for people to see that and be able to read that, especially I think most people, frankly, aren't going to read the entire document as much as I would like them to. I know I can't read every document that I want to go through with the city, and so having kind of a more concise Cliff Notes version of that up at the front, I think, isn't necessarily a bad thing to have. If we did put it in the appendix, I would think we'd want something to point to it at least, so that way people know where to find it and it doesn't just get buried in the appendix. Because I think it serves more purpose up front.
Vice Chair Thompson?
Well, here's another thought. We could do a forward and executive summary. And I do generally agree, based on most of our citizens, that they would appreciate the summary outline of what is in the document. And it does help get them interested, those who might be, to maybe go after a certain part that they would be further interested in. Because a lot of people just don't have the time or the interest with their time to read the whole document, or even the table of contents for that matter. I mean, I'm just being real. It's just, who reads the whole newspaper these days? So, but I also feel strongly that the couple paragraphs that we have been discussing about the intent and how, shall we say, how we really feel about this document, I think that that should be up front. And maybe by putting it in 2 parts up front, I think there's a possibility that we could win both methods there.
Commissioner Dorian?
Just to frame it a bit more positively, right? I think the purpose of an executive summary is often that it is going to an executive, so like your boss or somebody else's boss. So I think when we're saying that the community is not necessarily going to read the whole thing in a positive frame, that's because they're our boss. So to give them something that they can read like an executive, I think is a positive framing of what we've been saying. But along those lines, when you're putting something together for your boss, you've got to make sure it's tightly worded because people will find things and then we'll go down that hole. So I'm agreeing with what Commissioner LaSalle said as well. I think we want to be cautious of how we're framing things so that it does represent the conversation we just had about mitigating imperatives and all that fun stuff.
Okay, I'm going to take an effort at summarizing this conversation. So I'm hearing after some discussion that there could be broad support for executive summary option 2. I'm looking at Commissioner Macias because you kind of staked a different position at first, but you're coming along? Okay, okay, so, okay. With the exception of the last section in option 2, which is the conclusion. And I'm hearing, I saw at least 4 nods, and there may be more, that paragraph needs to better reflect the conversations that we've had about the document being not a cohesive vision, but kind of a constellation of possibilities for our community. Commissioner LaSalle?
I just used the last paragraph because those 2 sentences were, I think, a good example of the point I was making. But I would argue that there are similar elements of language that we can think throughout.
Okay.
For example, if we just go through the first line, the parks, the pros plan serves as the city's long-range guide for delivering high-quality parks, etc. That seems also very imperative.
Vice Chair Thompson, were you indicating you'd like to speak before? Okay. Okay, so now I'm hearing executive summary 2, but it may need some more comprehensive edits that take out suggestions that this is a comprehensive, like cohesive vision.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yes, Debbie, of course.
Because I think, so what we tried to do on option 1 is kind of capture some of that uncertainty. It's a framework. It provides strategies. It's kind of like, that's what the purpose of it is. And I think option 2 then goes into more, we can add more then into what each chapter does to provide those cliff notes and maybe just remove that conclusion section.
Like that.
Commissioner LaSalle?
So for me, I like both executive summaries, but I think the conversations we've had in the past, and partially that I brought up, where with regards to the interest of an executive summary was also to position the document of what it is and what it is not. And so the idea of executive summary option 2, I think is great because it outlines exactly what it is and hits on the highlights. My recommendation wouldn't necessarily be just let's remove the last paragraph, but more make sure that the entire executive summary is written in a way that outlines the fact that these are recommendations, thought out recommendations, etc. But sorry, not recommendation, these are options, but this does not, the list of suggestions or of items listed in the pros plan does not constitute an integrated recommendation, and have that reflected in the wording that we have throughout. I gave some examples both in the first line and the last paragraph, but I would argue that we can find them throughout the entire executive summary.
Commissioner Dorian?
I think similar, because that was going to be my point about option 1 is that it reads more like a document purpose section than an executive summary. And I do think we want a summary of the substance of the plan in there. But I appreciate what you're saying, Debbie, about the way that it's framed in option 1 is a little bit more, what's the word I'm looking for? Less concrete in the way that it describes what the plan has achieved. So I think there's a sense of the language use in option 1 when it's describing what the plan achieves. But I do think the reason I like executive summary option 2 is because it does function as a summary instead of just a document purpose. Yeah.
Go ahead, Debbie.
So I think what I'm getting out of this is option 2, you like the more detail and the cliff notes because it provides that overview, but to go back and make sure that it speaks to that it's more options, not recommendations. Particularly, I heard that you gave a couple of examples, so we can go back and tweak it in that way and bring it back in January for another review.
That's what I heard, yes. Thank you. Okay. Are we ready to move on to Appendix F? Yes, let's do it.
No, I think go to the very last part. I think we went over everything except the descriptions of the funding strategies that begin on page 10. And these are the correct numbers on the worksheets. The worksheets are attached to this, I gave you that file separately. It's usually combined at the end of this text. And the only point again is to say that it's feasible to do this, but it's really up to city council to pick and choose how they're going to finance this. We simply have to prove that it's feasible to do what we've listed in the CFP and in the pros plan. And the only recommendations on page 13 just summarize that it is possible under 6-year or 20-year to do this using park impact fees, allocation of REIT between certain percentages of it, and then a property tax levy lid lift if you need to do that. Now, I only said the levy lid lift. I didn't get into whether it's a recreation center. I didn't explain the 7-year lifts you can do if you get to that point, because this is an exercise to prove feasibility. It's not necessarily to walk into city council and say, do it this way or this way or this way. And again, this is in the appendix, not in the document text itself. And frankly, when I present these pros plans to councils, oftentimes this is what they want to know. Is it feasible to do this? And they all take their own measure about what they want to do it. They just need to know that it's within feasible realm.
Commissioner Macias?
I had some questions on these alternatives. So we have alternative 1, 2, and 3. And if I'm looking at this correctly, all options include levy lift somehow, right, increase. There is no way to have current levels of existing service without increasing something, increasing revenue somehow, correct?
In the way that we've organized them.
Okay.
Now, you could avoid the levy lid lift if, under this example, as you increase the impact fee higher than what we tested, or if you increased REIT higher than what we tested, or if you went into some of those special enterprise funds that are in your general fund and tap them more. So that we use the levy lid lift as the default. You got to that point, this is what it would take to do that, because keep in mind in your capital facilities program, there's a recreation center, there's a multi-generational community center. And if those are in your capital facilities plan, then you're going to have to look at quote a levy or a bond. And that's why we do use the levy for that.
I had seen, I mean, there was a previous note in here about funding with strategic opportunities too, and REIT. Is it possible to have an alternative in there? I have some hesitation of giving options for funding strategies that only require increases in a levy or bond. There's no other way to do that. And I think that there should be an option. You know, I would prefer to take it out of REIT if that was the option instead of increasing tax across the board on all alternatives at this point. I mean, I'd like to hear what others have to say, but I feel like there is some resistance to that. And if there is no other option other than that, that is a tough place to be.
I think your challenge would be, as long as you have a recreation center in there,
Yeah.
the breeds and the impact fees and even your general fund allocations are not going to be able to pay for that.
I think that's okay. I think for me, that's okay to leave it. For me to say an MPD or a tax levy, it has to be specific and there has to be value for it. And those things carry value and those are very specific. But to say just existing levels of service without anything else makes it tough. That's a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah, keep in mind that a metropolitan park district gives you the ability to finance and operate. Per se, it does not give you the amount of money to build something. Even a metropolitan park district has to go out for a bond or has to go out for some other financing measure. So your real issue or your real challenge is, as long as you want to have a recreation center facility, that type of facility, then you're going to be looking at a levy or a bond. And here I've described it as a levy, not a bond, because the levy is so much more flexible.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And I think that that's also where this like coordination comes with MPRSA. If we are paying into a district for items that we currently are not, like, it's hard to quantify what we're receiving from that other than maintaining a senior center. That's a tough decision for me that, is that where we want to go instead of finding our own, which is where I could see an MPD. So there's,
If I were a council person and I were nervous about the levy, I would probably look at the CFP and pull the rec center out and say, we'll do that, we'll decide on that separately. And when we do decide on that, then we'll look at a bond or a levy at that point. But as long as you have that big item in there, and it's probably not just the recreation center, it's Lake Point, because you're buying some considerable property at Lake Point. To avoid not having the levy in it, consider again, this is just an analysis. This is not what they're going to do. As an elected official, I'd probably pull that out and say, I'll defer that for now until we get to the point where we have to figure out how to pay for that project and then add it back in if we get to that point. But much more specifically about how I'm going to do it.
Commissioner Dorian and then Commissioner Vanderlim.
I just want to clarify something that I'm hearing, because we've said these are funding strategies to maintain the existing level of service. I'm not sure that they are. I think it's increasing the level of service, right? In some of the, because we don't have a recreation center. So we are proposing that we would create one so that we could increase the level of service to get in line with the expected level of service for a city of our size. But that therefore it's not maintaining the current level. It's making a decision that is what we want to do, which we're giving the council the option here of how they would go about doing that. But then the other side of that is the question around, like, can we put that to voters? Can we get them to align on the more than, what is that, 60% of the funding would be for new additions, not for maintaining what we've got. Now, I appreciate to maintain the level of surface, we are going to have to make some new additions. But that's where the trade-off is, which maybe we don't have to make that decision, but I think we should be clear that it's not to maintain the existing level of service. This is within the bounds of the plan, the proposed increases to level of service to meet this.
This is your proposed level of service. Correct. So we sometimes distinguish them between ELOS and PLOS.
Which, yeah, just to finish the thought, and I know I saw the hand. I guess that brings up an old hoary chestnut of when did we decide on those proposed levels of service? I guess I'm just going to drop that out there and shut up. But, yeah.
I think when you looked at your capital facilities, your CFP list, and you went through things that are already budgeted, you looked at acquisitions and then you looked at development. And then basically this financial strategy is to give you the options to do what's in that CFP. The only issue is the CFP and your financial strategies have to match. So if you reduce the amount of money you want to generate, and that gets back to the levy, then the big ticket items you have to pull out of the rec center and maybe some Lake Point. Want to leave them in for now, then it'd be up to council. They can adopt partial, or they can withhold for a certain period of time if they want to. But for the pros plan, the only thing that they have to decide in the pros plan is that the analysis indicates it's feasible. They don't have to make any decisions on specific projects. They don't have to make any decisions on specific financing strategies. All that RCO cares about and GMA cares about is what you're considering economically feasible. And the answer is yes, it is economically feasible. Is it politically desirable? That's a different question for council to resolve.
I still think we're grappling with the kind of the same thing that we've been grappling with all along, which is that we have not made a recommendation about a specific vision, including projects, that is a proposal. But yet when we kind of come down to the end, we're talking about a proposal. I think that is where the challenge for many on the commission has been. And so I do think the language, and how, I know this is a requirement of the state and we need to do this so that our community remains eligible for funding. That's really important so that we can maintain good amenities for our residents. But at the same time, I think how it is framed in the document feels really important to me so that we are capturing how this commission has thought about the process and that we're not representing it as something that has not been for us. So I think these are important points that are being raised. I'm going to go to Commissioner Olson and then Commissioner Vanderlyn.
Yeah, I just I shouldn't spend too long on this because it's mostly just me whinging about level of service and how difficult that is to manage, because especially with something like parks, like how do we define level of service in this existing level of service and then say we're going to maintain level of service when the population is going to increase or go down, or the people using different facilities, the proportion of those people change. Often you have to build new facilities. Buildings have design lives. You eventually have to replace them. And so, yeah, so I think we should have a distinction between existing and proposed. I just generally find level of service, the more you dig into it, the trickier it gets. It's really hard to pin down an existing level of service that we can maintain, because that kind of just sets you up to be in a position where you can't maintain it. I would point to traffic as a big example of this, where we're like, well, we want that level of service for roadways. Well, as you add more cars, density changes, you can't hit that level of service. It is not possible. And you've backed yourself into a corner where now you can't do anything. You've kind of tied your hands behind your back. So anyways, I'm not going to go on that rant, but I just don't love, well, I've already gone on the rant. I just don't love level of service language. I think Tom has mentioned previously that like the national associations kind of shifted away from some of those metrics, and I would guess it's similar reasons. It's difficult to pin that down, and then you get into this kind of back and forth that you can't easily support, and you end up spending a lot of time and legwork on that. And then I guess I would have kind of a question around proposed, right? Like if we are proposing these items from, say, the CFP to address Commissioner Dorian's kind of big question there, what does that entail on our end? Because my understanding is with any proposal that we have, each individual project still has to go through the process and be approved by council still, right?
Now you're putting forward a pros plan that has proposals in it. Then there is a proposal level of service. And then there also is a method of financing to make sure that it's compatible. You can adopt that, council can adopt that. That doesn't mean that you have to do everything that's in the pros plan. Or that you have to do them within any time schedule that is even laid out in the analysis. That's up to council. You cannot exceed, though, what this lays out as your proposal level of service or your financial feasibility. But you don't have to accomplish it all if you choose not to as you move forward or as council moves forward.
Thank you.
Commissioner Vanderlyn?
Yes,
And then
I'm
Commissioner
back
LaSalle after
to,
that, sorry.
I'm back to Appendix B at the very end, page 180. We had this discussion last time. This section here is labeled recommendations. And we've tried to steer away from the idea that these were recommendations.
It should probably say findings. Because
Or
the
something.
findings of the analysis say it's feasible to seek. Yeah, we shouldn't use the word recommendations.
So, the sentence after
Could
that,
say-
it could be something like, options 1 through, or, what we're presenting here are 6-year, 20-year financial strategies, feasible strategies. Options 1 and 3.
Yeah. So findings would be better.
Findings would be fine.
You could say Tom's ideas if you want. So
Oh, yeah, let's do that. I like that. Let's take complete, shove this right back out to
All right.
staff and under the accountant or under the consultant. But I think we just need to avoid that recommendations.
Yeah, you don't want to, that's not what you're doing. Correct.
What you've done, I think, very well is given us 3 excellent alternatives. And I get what the underlying piece here is. We're minimizing the amount of a levy and minimizing the amount of the increase in the property tax by using the other options, everything from impact fees to REIT to that tax levy amount. And
One nerdy fact is I think $40 million is what your new acquisitions and projects were for. And for the purposes of analysis, I said the first 6 years is a third of that. Well, if you look at the amount that would cost a household in the first 6 versus the full 20, it's less in the full 20 than it is in the first 6, because some of your sources like REIT are going to proportionally increase greater than what your costs would be. So, you know, if I were council, I wouldn't take a third of the 40. I would look at what the trends are and then figure out how I wanted to do that on an annual basis. But you have a much more feasible if you look at all the facts in the 20-year than if you try to look at the way the 6-year is structured.
So in presenting this to the city council, do geek out. I think they need to understand that, and that needs to be pointed out to them. I can kind of read all of that between the lines when I went through this, but I don't think all readers would understand that what we've got here are 3 alternatives. And what is the distinguishing feature between these 3 alternatives is what drives that lower bottom line increase in the property tax. That's going to get people's attention, and they're going to ask them more questions.
And probably the other question is, what are you trying to finance? You're trying to finance everything. Administration, maintenance, repair. You're not just looking at building things.
Thank you.
Commissioner LaSalle.
Yeah, just echoing a lot of what the other commissioners said, and I'm going to side with you. I actually am very comfortable with, in the context of what you mentioned, Tom, of we have to show that it's financeable. I'm much more comfortable, for example, with Appendix F2 than I am with Appendix F, and I know we'll get to F2 afterwards, so I'm not going to jump the gun here. But just because F2 lists, this is everything, if all these options, this is how much they cost. All these revenues, this is how much they could provide, and look, it balances out. Totally fine with that. I think the framing of, and it's collected in Appendix F, so I'm fine with the data there as I'm fine with the data in F2. But the framing of Appendix F and what I heard from other commissioners, or at least definitely what my thought is that if we look at the alternatives that are listed there on the screen for now, calling things scenarios or options or what we're arguing here in the alternatives are not alternative should we fund, but rather if you're funding everything, this is how we get there. And I understand why we want to give several options, but I also want to recognize, and this is being echoed by other commissioners, that by providing alternatives for the full funding, there is still that context of recommendation of everything that's there has been quantified and should or could be interpreted as should be done. And therefore, we're not telling you should you do it, but rather this is how you could, these are the options for you to fund it. again, don't have any issue and understand the intent with needing to show that it's balanced out, just that the messaging is less about here are options and more these are your choose your own adventure to fund everything with the understanding that this document is positioned towards funding everything.
We have to watch our verbs and our nouns. Right?
I mean, well, I want to, because if the planning commission needs to provide this recommendation to the city council, I want to make sure that this is made clear that, and I have something at the end of this meeting, but I want to make sure that city council understands that this is a list of options, but this is not a comprehensive integrated recommendation on behalf of the entire planning commission.
Vice Chair Thompson.
Well, I agree with that, and it's kind of like a slide rule as far as what if you, if you have what we have, you got to look at a little bit of cost that's going to have to increase our budget. But as you go out and increase to the right, you're going to have more requirements for tax increases. I get all that. I just, the way, I understand why you've laid this out the way it is, but it doesn't really have any words or music about the entire policy and priorities of the city, because the costs of the lid lift, the REIT, the impact fees, just those three things have significant political, I don't like to use that term, but I just use it from the sense of how our general population and our constituency would see it as for, shall we say, this reason, very hard to swallow. And you've got things that are important like the police services, public works. They have their own transportation district and all those items. Somewhere in the wording here, I don't see the slide rule saying that this is not a black and white choice. You can start at the bottom and slide up, and here's how you might do it. And then they can take those incremental changes, because I tell you, there's going to be other programs in the city that would see, and if they went along with one of these alternatives, they'd be jumping up and down. So I'm just my.
In your budget and in your general fund, you have some pretty creative ways you've been paying for parks and for acquisition of swamps and so on. But the reason we're using impact fees and REIT and a levy lid lift is because those are the three that are defined to be primarily parks. And if we go away from those three, then we're getting into much more creative financing that creative is not bad. It's just you got other ways of which you're doing it. But if we were trying to go there, then we'd have to justify why we're using those particular tools. And this is just a more straightforward. These are the primary ways you finance parks. And so that's why we just focused on those three.
Where is that said in this plan? I mean, it sounds good, but I don't know where that is said.
When it's appendix F, and you've renamed it a different appendix number. But in the definition, there's pages in there about how do you pay for general government?
Which one?
No, but you're on the right one.
Oh, okay.
Just back up a couple. Keep going back. Keep going back. Okay, keep going back one more. So in there, we describe all the ways you're financing general government and all the methods and what you've been paying for. Then we take a look at how you finance PROS plans, public sources and private sources, and we lay out all the different alternatives and which ones are dedicated primarily for doing that. But in that description, the three that stand out that we can easily say these are typically how we finance parks plans are the impact fees and REIT and levies. That doesn't mean any of those other options can't be used. It's just for the purpose of analysis, these are the least controversial methods that we can look at to say this is how we generate that. Now, to go further than that, council's got many more tools that they can look at besides these three when they put together your parks funding strategies. And when they do that, they're going to take a look at all the services in the city. This only has to analyze how you get to the parks number in the most easy, justifiable way. It doesn't mean that council is going to particularly use these tools, but all we have to prove is that it's feasible under typical conventional financing methods.
Okay, thank you.
I found for myself, Vice Chair Thompson, that Appendix B had pretty good descriptions of what all of the options were in a way that was easily digestible to me, and I'm not a finance person.
That's
Commissioner Dorian?
This might not live in the plan as is, because I appreciate we have to do what the state is expecting. So if the state is expecting us to give 3 different alternatives that all hit the same amount of money because it has to hit the amount that we've got in the capital facilities plan, then that's what we have to do here. I think what I would find useful, and whether or not it fits in the plan is a open question, but it's something like what I think, is it called service level budgeting? That the council does for identifying that, so where you've got a bullseye, which is like the things you have to do. And we don't have to do it, but maybe like to maintain existing level of service, here's what that would look like. Then we go a tier beyond that and say, if you want to increase level of service in your real tough areas, like with your indoor facilities, then this is what this would be. And then the final one would be like the biggest circle would be, then you can all do all these things. Those to me would be like options. Now, I appreciate that the state wants this, so that makes sense. But for us to see what that would look like, I think would be useful. We might not get it, but I think that would be helpful for me to get more of an understanding of, if we get a lot of pushback from community, or if council do on raising taxes, where can we pull back to and still maintain existing level of service? Like what's our baseline?
I think that's really where the council gets into the budget process.
Mhm.
So I don't want to be running a parallel budget here. So I think we have to sort of stick with the limitations. We are recognizing that we're doing this to meet the state requirements. And as Tom said, this is basically showing alternatives to meet that full amount. When council are looking at the budget, they're trying to figure out how to fund everything. And doing that exact exercise when they're going through the budget is looking at service levels and what they're going to fund and what they're not going to fund. So again, that is taking this plan, and when they're then going to the budget and balancing this with other priorities, figuring out then, is there room to do anything for parks? And if there is, what is it and how are we going to fund it in line with how we can do everything else? But I don't think we're not going to get to that as part of the pros plan.
I guess my question is, can council reverse engineer from what we've got here to the information they would need to do that? Because there isn't really a line between the capital facilities plan and the level of service that is enabled. So that's the challenge that I've got. If I'm council, I'm going through that process like, shoot, we can't spend as much as I was hoping. Where do I cut back? They would need to be able to reverse engineer that from this plan. So my question is like, is that there? Is it going to be obvious what they can pull back to?
Council can pull back anything. They can pull back any projects that are in your CFP. And as they do that, that changes your proposed level of service. They can change not only what they want to generate to pay for it, but the methods they choose to pay for it. Now, if you go into them with 3 different levels of service or CFPs, and therefore 3 versions of every different kind of CFP you come up with, council is going to look at you and say, just give me something that I can work with. And give me something that meets the RCO so I can be eligible for grants, because as a council, I know I'm going to take apart the financing methods and I'm going to take apart the CFP as I progress and have to balance off everything in the city year to year to year. Council is also going to say, is there public support for what's in that capital facilities plan? Sure there is, but council also knows that as you come to a financing decision, say like on a recreation center, that has to be sorted out with the public again, specifically for that and specifically for the methods of how they're going to pay for it. Every council gets these kinds of pros plans knows that. And not just in park plans. I know that in transportation plans and in sewer plans and water plans and so on. So we don't need to do what council is charged to do with every day. We simply need to present a vision that the public supports, a list of projects that match that vision, and a feasible way of paying for it as an analysis. We're not binding council to any of this. This is a purpose of analysis to move forward.
I'm going to try to answer your question, Commissioner Dorian, for the sake of, in my view, what we are doing is creating kind of like an a la carte menu for council, and they can pick and choose. But I do not think that this document provides them any sort of guidance about how to do that. I don't think that we are providing the framework that they need to, they're going to have to figure that part out on their own, because we're not doing that for them in this plan. And I think that has been one of our, again, continuous undercurrents of perhaps a bit of concern that we've had on the commission. But I think it is what it is at this point. Have we sufficiently discussed Appendix F? Yes? No? Commissioner Olson, would you like to say something? Commissioner Olson, go ahead.
Yeah, really brief. I think if I'm understanding correctly, we're essentially proposing that they purchase everything on the a la carte menu to start with, and then council's going to have to pare that back.
Yeah, we're
Most likely,
telling them
yeah.
that it is possible. It is within the realm of possibility that you could purchase this entire menu. If
Yes.
you're going, for some reason, I'm thinking about going into an art museum cafe for some reason, I don't know, and you've got like a whole bunch of choices. So we're saying, we know that you could pick every choice. It is it is financially feasible. It's possible. It's probably not, it's not probable. When you go to a cafe, you don't actually order everything on the menu for various reasons. But that's sort of what this feels like to me. I think we're circling around that. Go ahead, Commissioner Vanderlyn.
I really appreciate this bit of conversation, because I think one of the things I've tried to keep to myself as we've gone through this is not to get so focused on the pros plan. We lose sight of this is just part of the landscape. That the city council has all of these pieces. And I was really taken aback myself in reading the survey and seeing the answer to, oh, yes, we like all of these things, but if you're going to have to cost more, I'd rather you pull back. That to me, as I've said in our last meeting, was very powerful to me. But that's not just pros. That's going to be everything. And the city council will be out there balancing these out, just as Tom described. What's the political, what's the public interest in these particular things? And it's not just parks, it's going to be all of those other things. We can't provide that answer for them. That's the work they have to do. And I think it would even be presumptuous of us to anticipate that, well, what people really want is, in city council, what you really ought to do is. That's not our charge. I think what our charge is what we've been presented here, to say, okay, listening to citizens out there, looking at what would be reasonable, and we need to have based on what we do know about level of service, this is what we need to have 6, 20 years out, and this is how you could finance it. And you could finance it. Not saying that you should. Right. Not saying that all the things on this list are all good, but these are the things that people seem to want, and it seems like these are reasonable things to do. And I think we're delivering that. Maybe some of us will we'll find a way, we'll have another economic task force again, will come back in a year and say, okay, you know, we need to have some options here, but that's not the work of this group.
We may not all be in the same place on that, because I do think one of the, I agree with you, Commissioner Vanderlyn, and at the same time, I think one thing we're struggling with is that readers, the general public will look at this document, our city council members perhaps will look at this document, and they will say, this document was recommended by the Planning Commission, and they will assume that we recommended every single thing in it. And I think we haven't had the opportunity to really look at each parks project, for example, at that level of detail. And so I think that there are some commissioners who, including me, I will be transparent about that, have had that as a concern and wanting to make sure that we are framing this in such a way that it is very clear what this document is and what this document isn't. Because it is not presenting, we're not actually really presenting like a vision for our parks, in that we know exactly what our community doesn't have, what it wants, what it needs, and how to do all those things. So I think, while I agree with you, I think maybe that's where, when it comes down to it, there's still something that doesn't feel quite satisfying about this process for some of us, yeah.
I mean, that's been one of the points I've tried to make throughout this, is that we want to be very clear that we're not making recommendations.
Yes, that's
We're
right.
coming up with here is feasibility
Yes,
based upon what we've garnered from contact with the community in our own discussions. So I think that's why I've
Yeah.
tried to make as much as possible clear that we are not giving recommendations here.
yes.
Even the, what we have in the appendix, these are examples of what the city could look to in terms of feasible strategies. But we're not recommending any particular strategy. We just know that the city council is going to have to address these issues. Give them as much information as we can, but it's not within, I believe, our purview to make recommendations more than it is to make a decision about, well, this park amenity is more favored than that one. We're not charged to make that decision either. That's a decision that has to, again, go to the city council, because they're the ones who answer to the public. So to me, that's what I want to see when I read this, and to a large extent, I think I do. For the exceptions we called out.
The Growth Management Act has a catch-22 to it. It says you have to have a 20-year vision about what you want to achieve. And if things aren't in that 20-year vision, you can't pursue them, even if they're in abstract goals. In the same token, it says you have to be financially feasible. It doesn't say that you have to finance it, just let's say it has to be financially feasible. So your risk is, if you reduce your vision by taking things out of the CFP, for example, you can get to the point where all of a sudden you're going down to RCO and saying, we want a project for something that's not there. There's no holistic vision to it. So it's better to be a little more optimistic in your vision than to be pessimistic, because you do not have to complete everything in the optimistic vision. But on the other hand, a pessimistic vision you can't exceed. So this is an optimistic vision document.
So I work in salmon recovery, and sometimes to get funding for a particular funder, your project has to be on a list. But we don't call it a vision. We just say your project has to be on the list. And I think that that is what this is too. These projects simply have to be on a list. So we have just made a list of projects, and any project on that list we could get funding for. We could pursue funding from
Right.
RCO for that project.
Right.
So I think it maybe is the vision language that is tripping some of us up. But I don't think that we are creating a vision. I think we are creating a list of projects.
Well, those list of projects though came out of the vision, came out of the surveys and the workshops and the gap analysis and and the comparison of benchmarks. They didn't just come out of nothing.
Commissioner LaSalle?
So fully agree, they're not out of thin air, 100%. I'll just give an example. I think that when I was looking at the pros plan is a good illustration for me of maybe the challenge between a list of projects and vision. If we take the list of parks with possible amenities, both Moorlands and North Shore Summit have as a potential improvement, for the potential improvement, a basketball court and a basketball court slash pickleball court. We do not have, and I'm not going to say we, I'm going to say I do not have, but I would argue probably the same for the other commissioners. I do not have a vision that allows me to know if we should have those two basketball slash pickleball courts, if we should have one more than the other. Why are we having two basketball courts as amenities and not one basketball court and another one a set of ping pong tables? So what we have is a list of projects that, based on feedback from surveys, based on understanding of what would fit or what could fit, are options of we could have a basketball court at Moorlands. We could have a basketball court at North Shore Summit. We're not saying we should, and we're not saying in terms of a comprehensive vision, we're not saying we should have one more than the other. We're not saying we should have both, and we're not saying that it's going to be a basketball court or nothing. It could be ping pong tables if City Council decided it so, and it happens not to be in the pros plan. So if it were a list of comprehensive projects of you pick and choose everything within that list, but this is the list, this is the alpha and omega of everything there is, that would be one thing. I would argue that it is not, and we haven't had the opportunity to talk or to have that visioning exercise. And that's fine, and I fully understand, based on the conversation and the clarification that happened last meeting, that there is a regulatory necessity to have this document that doesn't necessarily have to reflect real life. I'm just calling out the fact that this is one example, I'm sure we can find many others, where we have a list of projects. This is not the entirety of what could be. This is just a list of options of what could be, among other things. And to the point Commissioner Vanderlyn was making, and others as well, is when we read this document, it will naturally be the expectation of anyone, me included, to consider that this is a comprehensive list. And I want to make sure that when we communicate this to City Council, they understand what this document is, but they also understand what this document is not. And so I don't have any issues with the list of projects that are there. I don't have issues with the appendixes that define all the costs and expenditures and potential revenues, because that is a regulatory mandate. Totally fine with that. I just want to be mindful of how it is positioned in a way that City Council and the general public understand that we as Planning Commission are not recommending this as this is what you should choose from. And the question is not, should you do it, but rather, do you do everything or do you do something piecemeal within that list? That's all.
Okay, I am going to kind of call that conversation done because I feel like the same point has been made several times now, and that's great. But for the purposes of moving forward, it's 8:45, so we've got 15 more minutes before I'm going to propose a break. Are we through with Appendix F, Commissioners? Yeah, okay, how about F2?
Change the wording that these are all options. Try to make it as non-committal as possible.
Commissioner LaSalle?
As I mentioned before, I'm very comfortable with F2. I appreciate the change to option. We could probably wordsmith all day, but this is effectively mentioning the fact that these are funding avenues. I understanding the regulatory needs, totally fine with this document, with this appendix.
All right, how about Kenmore ELOS? Existing level of service. Commissioner LaSalle?
Yeah, it's a good inventory of what it is. So no, it's clear in terms of resources and capabilities. I'm good with this.
This one was instructive to me in terms of the comparison between the existing level of service in 2025 and what it would be in 2050 with our population, our projected population increase, and that we were at a deficit. So it was helpful for me to see it laid out that way.
But remember, this is a straight line of taking your existing ratios and carrying it forward. But keep in mind, clear over there in the total, if you did that, it would be 53 million. And instead, we're adjusting to compensate for things that you don't have, that should have, and things that you're well developed. And so we're coming in with 40 million. So you see, we saved you 13 million right there.
Commissioner Vanderlyn?
Just kind of an editorial comment. Whenever I look at schedules like this, what always comes into my mind, the absolute assurity is that these numbers are all going to be wrong over time. Yes. But what we've got here is a pretty clear exposition of what the assumptions are behind this. So you can go back here and say, oh, inflation really was 4%. So this is what they really mean. And I think this is actually useful information that the city council can go back to. We talk about paring down. Where would you make some decisions? There's some good information here that I think that would lead them to be able to have a place to start those kind of discussions.
And this is in the appendix. This isn't not in the document itself. You can modify the appendix as you go forward.
All right, I'm not seeing any other desire to comment on this part of the document. Anything else in the plan that commissioners have questions or outstanding concerns about? Commissioner LaSalle?
Have we finalized reviewing the documents? I think we have. Just want to. Okay. So as a one last thing kind of thing, I appreciate the echoes I've heard with regards to the challenge of threading the needle between, is this a document that is a commission recommendation versus a list of options that has been properly quantified, et cetera. I would like to submit to the Planning Commission a suggestion of, for lack of a better term, would be a cover letter for to be shared with City Council, explaining what the document is and is not, but not necessarily something that should be attached to the pros plan itself. I really appreciate the executive summaries that were shared with the wording changes that we suggested, and I look forward to the updated version next time around. But I think it might benefit from having an additional explanation of the intent of the Planning Commission that I'm happy to share on the screen if that's okay with everyone.
Yeah, I'm seeing nods.
Awesome. Debbie, Todd, I sent you an email last Wednesday. I was hoping we could maybe display the draft cover letter section of that email on the screen.
I need to send it to, you do have it, okay. Perfect.
I just need a few minutes to put
Okay.
it in a folder.
While Shannon is doing that, let's take a short break.
Yeah.
So that people can stretch their legs and take care of their bodies. So we will convene at 9 o'clock. We'll have a 9-minute break. We're all settled in and we are back in session. Commissioner LaSalle.
Thank you. Yeah, so as I mentioned before the break, I think these are the elements that I took a very first pass at writing up as a suggestion to get the feedback from the Planning Commission on what could be either topics, points that we want to cover when we will be presenting this to City Council, or or as a cover letter. Just for the sake of putting an audio line, I will happily read this. Apologies for everyone, it is reading a long email, but I'll try and make it as interesting as I can. The Kenmore Planning Commission is pleased to transmit the draft Parks, Recreation, and Open Spaces Plan for your review and approval, your being City Council. This document serves as a critical purpose as a statutorily required element of our city to define and provide. Its timely submission and adoption are necessary to maintain the City of Kenmore's eligibility for various state and federal funding programs, specifically meeting the planning requirements established by the Washington State Recreation and Conservation Office. We recommend approval of this document to ensure that vital grant funding avenues remain open for future park capital and maintenance projects. While the document satisfies the required regulatory framework and includes valuable preliminary data, such as resident survey results and high-level nationwide benchmarking, the Planning Commission notes that the content should be regarded primarily as an inventory and compliance resource and not as a compilation of detailed prioritized improvement and investment recommendations. The comprehensive strategic and policy framework requires the execution of a critical regional gap analysis and strategic visioning phase that was not fully achievable during this initial effort. This missing analysis is necessary to translate existing feedback and preliminary data into consensus-driven, actionable recommendations. Should the City Council wish to proceed with building a definitive park-specific, data-driven set of recommendations for Kenmore's parks and recreation future, the Planning Commission stands ready and eager to dedicate its time and resources to leading that subsequent effort. Maybe overcommitting their apologies in advance. To define a forward-looking and impactful vision for Kenmore's park system, the Commission recommends a systematic and data-driven approach built upon these three core elements, which are echoes to what we presented to City Council last time. First, refining what Kenmore wants by combining the City Council's strategic vision with the already documented policy framework and resident survey insights and feedback. Second, determining what Kenmore has by utilizing the comprehensive inventory data in the PROS plan in assessing accessible amenities in neighboring cities, such as the swimming facilities in Bothell and Mount Lake Terrace. Third, establishing the actual what Kenmore needs by replacing the existing nationwide data with focused benchmarking of infrastructure and capabilities against similar-sized Seattle metro area peer and neighboring cities. The crucial next step, the joint analysis of what Kenmore has and newly define what Kenmore needs, will provide the essential missing regional gap analysis required for targeted investment. We further recommend that this comprehensive planning approach be led by the Planning Commission in close collaboration with the city's environmental services and the Climate Action Plan Committee, leveraging the significant crossover synergies between long-term land use planning and sustainability goals. As an outro, we thank the City Council for its dedication to enhancing Kenmore's public amenities and for the trust placed in the Planning Commission to steward these important long-range planning efforts. We look forward to your feedback and collaboration on these critical steps to realize a comprehensive and beneficial vision for our community's parks, recreation, and open spaces.
Questions or comments? Commissioner Macias?
The first paragraph I feel is fine. I think it restates what we have in the executive summary, which is, it's a document meant to ensure we're compliant with RCO and GMA requirements. I'm okay with that. Where I feel that I cannot agree with you on this is the second part of this, where the comprehensive strategic and policy framework requires execution of gap analysis. And then further down, that is where I cannot. We have an entire chapter of chapter 5 that went through these items. We've defined what Kenmore wants with feedback, with surveys, with open house, We have defined what Kenmore has with Chapter 5, with what we have within the city, nearby cities. We have what Kenmore needs, which is giving us a metric, again, in Chapter 5, of what wasn't present. And I understand where you might have concerns on it, and that's fine. That's okay, but I think we went through this in depth, and it makes sense to me on how we got there and went line by line. So it's just, this is something that I couldn't agree with sending and redoing work that we have done for the past 9 meetings. It feels like we would be reinventing the wheel to do this over again.
Commissioner Vanderlyn?
Mike, please.
Commissioner Vanderlyn, could you
Sorry.
please use your mic?
We-
Yeah, thank you.
I do feel we've done quite a bit of work here, and I think we've done good work. I think it's very accurately and great deal of completion represented in the final document. I think there is more work that always needs to be done. I'm confident that what we have here today, given the edits that we've suggested, gives the city council what it would expect to have and what it needs. What the city council does with that and what process they take to turn this into a financially feasible and recognizing what the city needs and wants, it is city council's work. And I think, again, we've given them enough information and we give them valuable feedback that they can use to fulfill their mission. I think we've fulfilled ours here. So that's pretty much where I stand right now. I wouldn't, at this point, approve or disapprove or express approval or disapproval of the document, because I always need to have at least a couple of days to read something and digest it. But that's my impression right now. I would like to hear maybe from Debbie and Todd about, are there limitations on what we can propose in terms of our future docket in a transmittal letter? And maybe that's appropriate or inappropriate in a transmittal document.
It's getting late. My brain's not working. I think what I got, what I was expecting and what you put in the transmittal letter was, I think what I was thinking you would be outlining more is kind of part of the discussion of this evening, is that it's not a prescriptive plan, it's not a vision, it's not a list of recommendations. The finance is just showing that this amount is feasible, but what you do and how you do it is kind of part of that overall discussion with council, whether it's part of the budget decision or part of going forward with a ballot measure. So that's what I was thinking that would be the transmittal, not what you sent, which I think is sort of saying that it's wanting to do more than the pros plan. And the question then is what should that more be? And there are probably many different things that you could do for more. And how that is done is, I guess, to be determined as the council develops either its 6-year capital improvement program, as it discusses, is there a need for some sort of additional funding measure? So I think I'm kind of more leaning towards with Commissioners Vanderlyn and Macias that this is, the pros plan does what it does. And I think what the Planning Commission are trying to highlight is just that and the limits of that, but kind of handing it over to the council going, here it is as a document that you can now use as you move forward with budgeting and balancing things going forward. Because again, they will have to do that. So any parks project, this is not prescriptive in terms of what the parks projects will be when they're done, how they're done. You know, if we're going to do any park improvements, then you have to go through a design phase, a community engagement phase, as well as looking at a funding feasibility and all that. But this plan is not that. And I think that's part of the struggle that I'm hearing from the commission is you want it to be that, and it isn't. So I think you can express your desire that, you know, and highlight that this is part of the planning commission's concern, that it is not a prescriptive plan. It is not providing a specific vision and direction. It's providing a framework, a moment in time, an analysis to show that if you want to do some of this, you can use this plan as a guidebook. And that you wish you could do more. But again, I don't think that's really the point or the purpose. So I guess my question would be careful what you ask for, because I think the answer would be, thank you for that. But again, the Planning Commission's primary purpose is to make recommendations as it affects the comprehensive plan and some of those implementation plans. And I think what you're concerned about is if we had more, we could give you a document which gives you more information and more detail to make those decisions. And I apologize if I summarized that wrong.
I think your point is very well taken, Debbie, but I think that part of the struggle is not necessarily that some of the commissioners want it to be more, but that it will be read as that in the future by some people. Some people will look at this document and think, because this is in the plan, we should do it. And it will, I think that for me is part of the struggle with calling it like a cohesive vision, because I don't think we had the opportunity to talk about each project in the plan at a level sufficient for me to say, yeah, that's a project I think, you know, at a conceptual level should happen in Kenmore. So I just wanted to put a pin in that. And then Commissioner LaSalle, go ahead.
So first of all, thank you so much for sharing this, both Abby, Commissioner Vandal, and Commissioner Mercias. I agree with actually everything that was said, minus the chapter 5, where I personally feel that while we have done a ton of work collectively, and I'm absolutely not trying to minimize the work that was done or that is being done, I also feel as though based on what the inventory of activities and the benchmarking could be, it's not where I would want it to be, not personally, but based on, I'm on the Kenmore website webpage for the Planning Commission, and to your point, Debbie, that you just made, I will read what is listed, and while it is maybe not legally accurate, it's at least the messaging that carries over. The Planning Commission serves as a policy advisory body for the City Council, providing guidance and this is the important word, recommendation on the city's comprehensive plan and related land use documents. And when I started writing this blurb, I am totally comfortable sticking to the first paragraph of just saying, hey, by the way, it's a regulatory document, all good. When looking at that, and the point that Chair Banasinski was making is that because the Planning Commission is a recommendation advisory body to City Council, whether we want to or not, except if we spend hours wordsmithing, and we already have, and we might still, the document itself, it will necessarily, by the purpose of the Planning Commission, be seen, the pros plan will be seen as the Planning Commission's recommendation to City Council. And therefore, every project that is listed there will be seen as an integrated recommendation, even if we put all the caveats we want, will be seen as a recommendation by the Planning Commission, not as a list of options. And therefore, wanting to match the purpose of the Planning Commission, I want to be more proactive and maybe more positive than rather just saying, oh, this is just a regulatory document, and focusing more on if we, undefined collective we, but if we wanted to define what a vision for the Parks and Recs of Kenmore would be, this is a path forward. If we stick to just the first paragraph or a version of the first paragraph of, please understand that this is a list of recommendations, I'm totally fine. I'm only advising that from an interpretation perspective, it might be perceived as, yeah, you say that, but it's still the Planning Commission's recommendation to have the pros plan. And so the entire document is seen as recommendation. That's just what I'm trying to prevent. That's all.
Well, I'm interested in hearing how to address this, because when you are making a recommendation to adopt the plan, so you're giving a recommendation, and I guess what you're saying is we're giving a recommendation on the plan to meet these requirements.
I think
And
you make.
and you're highlighting the limitations of that. I mean, any recommendation you make to the council is just that, a recommendation. Council make the final decision. It's a moment in time. This document is a moment in time looking forward of the possibilities that you could, it is not anticipating any and every possibility in terms of a project, an acquisition, or anything like that, because new things come along all the time.
I think you just said it brilliantly, and for me, it really summarized the challenge that I have, and I would love to hear other planning commissioners, is that there's a stark nuance between Planning Commission recommends the adoption of this pros plan, and as it stands today, with the understanding of the changes that I'm definitely leaning very heavily in the yes, we should recommend City Council adopts this pros plan, and the difference with it being the pros plan is not the recommendation of the Planning Commission. And it's the difference between we recommend you adopt the plan, but this plan is not our recommendation, that I just want to be wary of. That's all.
Commissioner Olson?
I think I've been kind of in the middle on this, in some ways, where I can see both wanting this caveat and not wanting this, or wanting to dive deeper and not wanting to dive deeper. And I think one thing for me that I'm thinking of based off of the description that you just read is we are a recommendation and advisory body for the plan, the outline of the plan, not for each and every single element in the plan, because we cannot, and I don't think will, be able to get enough information on each of these plans without doing a project implementation phase, a design phase, a detailed analysis phase. And that doesn't make sense until you're actually getting ready to do those projects. So I don't think we can do the needs assessment for each of these projects at scale for the entire city. I don't think it's feasible, frankly. I wish it were. I get into debates with a planner friend that I have about needing pictures of every alternative. And I explained, well, I can't give a picture of every alternative because I can't design every alternative with the budgets provided. It's not feasible. It's not realistic. Or I shouldn't say I can't. We could, but it would cost a ton of money and wouldn't be worth it, because you're gonna throw out half of them, 3/4 of them before we even get there. And that's kind of, I think, how I see this is I feel like, I don't have it up on the screen here, but the last portion, the needs portion, is what has to happen with each portion of the plan. And so I feel comfortable saying overall, I approve of the overarching plan for these projects. That does not mean I approve of each project as a planning commission, because until we do that analysis when the project actually comes up, until we get ready to, go, okay, we want to implement this portion of this plan, let's begin that process. Let's go and, get community feedback, get information. Is this a gap? We can't get that information. And I also think I'm wary of a data-driven approach for requirements that the city has to meet, because I think those things can change and they can often lack nuance and come from good intentions and then lock us into decisions that we might not want. Vehicle LOS, level of service, being a great example of this. We can't meet vehicle level of service in most places because it would require paving over the entire city, which defeats the purpose. People still get around. People get around because our decisions change, our values change, and there are other types of transit services that we can use that aren't defined within that level of service. So I kind of think it's like basketball parks. How many do we need for X number of people based off the Seattle metro region versus, well, we have fewer people that play basketball in Kenmore, so we actually need this other type of park that we don't have as much of, that the level of service metric might say we don't need, but we do need. And so I think the needs assessment to that, especially in the case of parks and open space, is very subjective, and I think has to be done on a per project, per approach basis. And I think that's the point of this. I also think there will be people that will say, we recommend these projects and recommend all of the items in this study. And I think all we can do to that is say, no, that's not what we recommend. We recommended pursuing these things and investigating them because without more information, they appear to be good ideas conceptually. And they may be, and some of them will be good ideas, some of them will be great ideas, and some of them will be duds that we start to investigate, and then public feedback comes through, cost estimates come through, and it's not. I think a good example of this would be the trail project through Swamp Creek. I think there was an investigation of that project, and they were like, well, it's going to be $10 million for a raised bridge for, a half mile. City council said it's not worth it. Environmental advocates said, hey, it's not worth it. And that project has not happened. But that took a study, that took design time, and we can't do that for each and every project in this. I do think it might be worth noting that, less for council and more for the future individuals that will point to this and say, we recommended all of these things, as just a, hey, we recommended the plan. We recommended that we do implement this a la carte menu with the recognition that the community outreach, the visioning for each of these steps, all of that has to come later. That's my feelings on that and thoughts.
Okay, Commissioner Vanderlyn and then Commissioner Dorian. Commissioner Dorian.
Feel like I want to pause for a minute and let everything you just said sink in with people, because I think there's some important points there. I'll play my role as the historian here for a second and just try and roll people back to, why do we have comprehensive plans? Where did this come from? Well, it came from the state. And it came from the state because not only the state, but other states really didn't feel comfortable that the cities knew what they were doing all the time. Don't know why they thought that, but they did. And so they made requirements with things we want you to pay attention to. We want you to plan for parks. We want you to plan for roads. We want you to plan for a lot of other things. And if you want to get funding from us, and if you want to be able to support requests for funding from your citizens, you got to do this. Unfortunately, they called it a comprehensive plan. That's not ever going to happen. And that was an unfortunate thing we've all had to live with ever since then. And so we have. So this is what we do. Never going to be comprehensive. I'd like to maybe call it a strategic plan, but that even itself doesn't get us there. And the reality is that we will do this work. We'll give this work to the city so they can move ahead and do the good work that's being requested of them or required of them by the state. Will there be people who will come up to us, maybe even one-on-one in public, and say, you ought to go to the city council because you told them that they should do this. We should have a park here. We should have a ball field here. We should have a pool here. And because you have the guts to go back to the city council and fight for this, we're not going to get this. So you ought to do that. Well, I'll tell you, that's part of the price of being on the planning commission. Is that will happen. It's happened to me. I'm sure it's happened to some of the rest of you. I'll just risk being crude here, but we got to suck it up. That will happen. Now, in terms of saying in some kind of transmittal letter, and I think throughout the document itself, making it clear that there's a difference here from making a recommendation, again, should versus will or could. And I think we've done a pretty good job of things we've called out in the document itself to change that. Pointing out once again in a transmittal letter that this is what it's intended to do, is it's intended to provide city council with the starting place for being able to do planning and making decisions about allocating resources, roads. That's what this is intended to do. That's what we believe this document does. And so we recommend that you use this document for the purpose it was intended. I think that's perfectly legitimate, and we can do that. It won't stop people from coming back later. Other plans. where people are heavily invested in a particular amenity, a particular fund, and they're going to make it fine. That's what democracy is. We're supposed to listen. So I'll end the sermon there, but that's kind of what keeps me going day to day.
Thank you, Commissioner Evangeline. Commissioner Dorian?
I think just to give context of why I think it is important to share some context with council is we are not looking at this in a vacuum. I can look back at the 2020 PROS plan. This is a significantly different document in terms of the level of specificity it appears to go into, though I think to a certain extent we're drowning in data, and in the level that it describes itself as being prescriptive. Now, I think we've done a good job of walking some of that prescriptive language back, but that is, I think, where some of the concern is coming from, is that we've fallen into that trap of specificity and prescriptive language that suddenly it sounds like we're presenting the thing that we now know that we're not. And that's what we're trying to kind of square the circle on, is we have to make it, because we can't, unless we spend another few months going through this, we're not going to pull it all out. So we need to make sure that council are aware, that we are aware. This might look like a prescriptive plan in places, but it's not. I think that's ultimately where I'm landing. Yeah.
Commissioner Olson?
Yes, that's, I think, the thing for me right there is it might look like it in some spots because it is an overarching plan in these places. And I agree, we're drowning in data. I feel like we're drowning in data on everything that I look at nowadays. And that's a double-edged sword. It's got its pros and cons. And so I if we go to the second paragraph, or not paragraph, but portion of this, in the first, like what Kenmore wants and what Kenmore has, I feel like this, as you pointed out, we've outlined that pretty well. And the needs piece of that becomes a value question to the public and council. And I think if we instead framed it that way as, hey, maybe this doesn't need to come back to planning commission now, but council, like, please recognize, and here's public just more info saying, hey, this is not our, we're not recommending each individual portion of this phase necessarily, right? There are caveats, there is information here we don't have, and we realistically cannot expect to have. I'm not doing a good job wordsmithing this. I'm trying to think how to say this. That's the council's job, and I think council hopefully understands that. That they need to listen to the public and see what has been coming up over time to look at what is needed. I also think the connections with the Climate Action Committee and, oh my gosh, what is the other group that I'm forgetting the name of? Environmental Services, having those be folks that the city goes, like, they're going to be part of these plan processes. So just emphasizing that portion of this, of individual portions of this document as they are pursued, council needs to weigh what it feels is needed, and emphasizing more on that front than, hey, this needs to come back to planning commission so we can create a data-driven approach, because I'm not sure we can create that, I guess, is my fundamental concern there. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to go to Vice Chair Thompson and then Commissioner LaSalle.
Well, thank you for all of your thoughts and wisdom, all 6 of us, and I think that your proposal really gives some a moment for us to pause and consider what we're doing here and what we mean to do here. So I guess I have to give Debbie some credit here, because I think she did bring up a couple very good points. And I'll take those points in a different context than parks, or at least at this point. You know, think about that missing middle housing. When we were doing the actual wordsmithing on that, we had effect on individual properties. And we took some properties as examples, what would happen here and that, just as examples, based upon what the overall policy direction that we wanted to do. But we couldn't say on this property, draw the line here, or there should be a rule about an extra 20 feet of you know, space between the critical area and where it's developed. We took a lot of that into mind, and just as in this plan, we have taken some specific items into mind when we were building it. However, the comprehensive plan elements, you know, provide for policy-driven approaches, and then that is decided. Those actual policies are decided by the council. We did that already with the parks element, and that was with very minor changes approved by the council, and that is where we're driving. That is the impetus that we're driving for this now more close to the earth plan. So in the same way, this plan is looking at the smorgasbord, because that's what's being asked of us. We have to list the smorgasbord. And then we have to look at the element of how would we pay for the whole entire board. But the council has to decide what it's going to eat off the smorgasbord and what they're going to have to pay at the cashier at the end of the day. And they need to be responsible for that. What we have to be responsible for is not forgetting something off the smorgasbord. And I think we've done a good job of that with the help of our staff. So I would say, from the mission of what we're supposed to do by statute and by the docket, is we have done what we are supposed to have done. I do agree that maybe there needs, you know, and maybe we can do that in a forward, or in some of the language that we were working on today before this, a clear statement that these are not a set of requirements, but because that is not what's asked of the Planning Commission. What we are asked to do is to provide a view to what could be, and what are the council's choices should they decide to pick a few of those items out. And we've also spelled out what the choices may mean. We did do that. So from a governmental overview, I think that we have done, both in the element and in the plan, what has been asked of us. Now, if we can talk a little clearer in a paragraph or something that we've been discussing about a forward, or that all of us would be more comfortable with, I certainly would be comfortable with your concern that, you know, this is not all in all, you know, you should do this, that, and the other thing. This is a required task that we have completed to show all of the options available, as well as what they may or may not cost. And I don't mind that kind of language being in the document itself. And we talked a little bit about that. But I guess my perspective, and I'm sorry to be a little long-winded here, but I'm not the only one tonight. But that we got to look at what our job is within the government and what is being asked of us. And, you know, we're the last step before the council. And I personally believe if I was on the council, I'd be pretty damn happy with what we have done and what we will present to them, because it's probably the first time there's been a comprehensive list of what could be done in parks and recreation in this city. I mean, I'm not aware of one. Are you? You've been longer here than I have. Yeah, that's you I'm looking at. So anyway, that's my perspective.
Okay. It's just for a time check, it's 9:35. So when you are thinking about what you would like to say to the body, please reflect on whether it has already been said. And if it has, that's probably enough for tonight. With that said, Commissioner LaSalle and then Commissioner Dorian.
Dangerous to give me the microphone. I will try and be brief. Despite what you just said, to reiterate, my recommendation is not that the Planning Commission be in charge of driving recommendations for what must be done, because to your point, Commissioner Olson, I think it is a significant task that is not realistic to do, if not bite-sized. My tenure on this esteemed body started at the beginning of this year, and so I will only refer to examples from this year. But in terms of perception, and I love the fact that Vice Chair
Whoever is sitting here.
that you referred to, sorry, it's late, that you referred to the affordable housing and middle housing conversations, because that's the example I wanted to share in terms of the recommendation role of the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission recommended policy changes speaking to middle housing. The Planning Commission recommended changes to enable affordable housing in one way or another. The Planning Commission recently recommended the PROS elements, which are the strategies, goals, and vision. The difference here is that while I would assume that we will end on a consensus beginning of next year where the Planning Commission will recommend the adoption of the plan, the Planning Commission is not recommending a basketball court at Morelands as much as it is not recommending a basketball court at North Shore Summit, nor any other item listed there. And while after many conversations, this nuance of what the recommendation actually is from the Planning Commission is clear for everyone here, it would be disingenuous, in my opinion, to consider that anybody that is not here tonight believes or understands that while we recommended middle housing policy changes, while we recommended affordable housing changes, while we recommended changes to the PROS elements, we would not be recommending in the same fashion the PROS plan as listed as an integrated, comprehensive recommendation for City Council to act upon. That's it.
Commissioner Dorian.
So all I wanted to say was that there has been a list of all the possible park things before, because the capital facilities plan was in the 2020 PROS plan as well. Just how it showed up was a bit different. I think that's the key thing, but that was all I was going to note. It's not the first time.
All right, so I'm hearing, well, let's start here at the very highest level. Is there consensus, or at least, let's try to do consensus. Is there consensus for a transmittal letter of any kind, a transmittal letter? Do you feel as a body that we have something to say that requires a transmittal letter? Yes. Okay.
You can call it, you can call it what you like. I think I'm looking at this as either it's a letter that you write in advance to the council, or it's something that you present to the council like you typically do in terms of here's what it is, here's what it isn't, here are some of the things we had concerns, questions about. And so you're presenting the plan with the discussion that you've just had in terms of what it is and what it isn't. So you can do it either way. It
I
doesn't
think we
matter to
would-
me. I think
yeah.
it's the same kind of thing.
I think we would do if we did a transmittal letter, I believe that we would have those be talking points during the presentation. So I don't think they're mutually exclusive. And I do appreciate this conversation because I do feel like we are, it's been a very rich discussion. And while I think that there are kind of points of convergence among some of us, there definitely are points of divergence. And I think we're finding them through this conversation, that like we seem to maybe disagree, but also as we talk, I think that there also is agreement. And I think it's important for us to find that as a commission, because we need to speak as a commission when we're making these presentations to council. So it's important for us to have these conversations so that we know that we're there as a body and that we're not speaking from our own perspective, but from the perspective of the body. So with that said, it sounded to me like people were okay with the first paragraph, for example, of the letter. I think I heard that from everybody. Yes, okay. And then, I keep wanting to put my cursor over on the other screen so I can move it around like I can do at home, but I can't do that. Yeah, thank you. Could you move it down just a little bit, please, Todd, or Shannon, whoever's controlling that? I think I want it to go up. Yes, okay, so the second paragraph. Is that where we're having some divergence with the language, or does it not come until later?
the word while.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Vice Chair Thompson. That's where we're starting to have some divergence. Okay, I'm seeing a nod. Okay, so we'll maintain the first paragraph, and then the rest of the letter will be revised so that it reflects the kind of the conversation that we just had, where we had points of agreement. Okay, fantastic. And that is going to be done by?
Our next meeting is January 6th.
Yes, that's the date. I'm kind of
Like the
looking
who's gonna do the
to
Oh,
understand
yeah.
who, yeah. Commissioner Olson?
I would be happy to help wordsmith this.
Okay. Commissioner LaSalle, would you like to work with Commissioner Olson?
Sure, it'd be my pleasure.
Would anybody else like to join them? Let's maybe not have all of us do it, but only
Yeah,
one
point
more.
of-
Yeah, oh, one more, we have a quorum. That's right.
May I suggest?
Yes.
If they would, after they've kind of worked it over a little bit, send it over to Commissioner Marcius for some feedback.
Well, how about Commissioner LaSalle and Commissioner Olson work on it, send the draft to Shannon, and then Shannon can send it to all of us. And we can all,
Well, I was thinking
at
you
it.
wanted 3. Right, yeah, you can't have.
but Shannon can send it to all of us and we can,
Point,
But
point
we
of
can't-
information.
yeah,
Can't
go ahead.
respond.
When are we transmitting to council? Do we have a date? Yeah, of when we would be presenting the pros plan to council?
I think at the end of January? Because I think we're looking at January 6th.
January 26th as of now is when I have it on there for
And then
recommendation presentation.
secondary point of information, we won't have a docket by January meetings. So I'm assuming fairly light agenda meetings in January. Like my point is, I feel like we could probably start with a draft and then come back and review it in a meeting, so that's no longer a point of information. That's a proposal. So I don't know. I guess do I need to move on that, or like, yeah, I would just think if three of the commissioners are happy to work on it, we would then come back and see the next draft in a meeting and work on it in the meeting.
That is fine with me.
And then in the meantime, well, at the same time, when we the commission brings back that, Debbie and I will have refined executive summary as well. So you'll see that based on comments we received.
All right. Yes, Vice Chair Thompson.
Okay, so just for clarity, if what is developed goes in the executive summary, then all we need is a majority vote. If it is, quote, a transmittal where it says the planning commission is pleased, then it would take a unanimous to say that in a separate letter. We are, in something like that, it's either all of us or a minority report. So you get what I mean?
Yes, thank you for that. Yes. Okay. Debbie, are you going to say something? You don't
No,
have to. I was going to ask if there's anything else.
I think what you're really getting at is if you revise this and you bring it back, and then you can decide then, does this reflect
Yes.
what you're transmitting? And these are then going to essentially come into talk.
Yes.
points.
Yes.
And so there'll be things in there that you either all agree, it really should be something where it is more that you mostly all agree on.
Yes.
In the transmittal letter, and where there are points of diversion, those are things that you can raise as at the council as, here's something which
Yes.
I struggled with, for example.
Great. Anything else for the good of the order?
Yes,
Vice Chair Thompson.
if I may.
Go ahead, Vice Chair Thompson.
Okay, so if you remember, y'all, if you haven't done so, I'll forward it to about our Jurassic Park rules of engagement, from the lady that did some training, is that once we pass this document, when we go to the council, unless you have a minority report, we are all together. In front of the council, we do not make our points against the findings of the Planning Commission. That's not appropriate. And because we're supposed to stand together, 4 votes is standing together. So I just want to remind folks of that training that we had. Are you okay with that, Madam Chair?
Yes, that's fine. Thank you. Okay. Anyone else on commission for the good of the order? Commissioner Dorian.
I'm going to decide not to get into this too much now, but suggest maybe something for January. It was raised earlier about our position and role in government and what we play. I feel like if there's time in January, it would be useful to visit some of that, just because of some things that have been happening, like the STEP committee. Like I was aware that most of what needed to be done to enable the STEP law had already been put in our comprehensive plan, but then there are some new things coming up that sound like new zoning requirements, like corner stores and things like that. So understanding that piece, but then also some of the lack of a close feedback loop in some other ways. Like as we are accountable to the public, there are some things that have come up that have been a surprise to me that have happened between when we've recommended something and then when council gets it. So like understanding some of those things would be topics, if there's time in January, that I think could be valuable for us to touch on.
Well, if they change the zoning plan, that has to come to the planning commission by law, doesn't it? They're gonna change the zoning map?
No,
No.
no. Nobody's changing the zoning map
Okay.
on that specific example.
Mhm.
All right. Debbie and Todd, would you like to talk to us about our next meeting? That will be, you did a little bit already, but just to kind of anchor us there. Next, we're going to have a break, right?
Yeah,
We
so no-
canceled our next meeting.
You already canceled the next meeting.
We did.
So January 6th is our next one, so
Okay.
enjoy your holiday, enjoy the break. We'll come back one more time with Tom and have one more last discussion. We'll go over the executive summary, we'll go over the cover letter, transmittal letter, and then anything else for the good of the order on the pros plan. See if you guys are ready to make a recommendation with the understanding of what that really means, right? We've heard all that. And then plan for going on January 26th to council. So.
So for the folks that are working on this revised transmittal letter, please send what you think is your final draft version to staff at least a week in advance. So that's by the end of December. So it can then be included in the.
Fantastic. Well, happy December, everyone. Happy all the holidays that you celebrate with your family. And we will see each other in the new year, if not before. Thank you, everyone, for a good calendar year of work. Thank you to our clerks, Shannon and Michelle. You're amazing. Couldn't run this show without you. And thank you, Debbie and Todd, for doing everything that you do to make our work possible. Appreciate you all. And with nothing more to come before us, this meeting is adjourned at 9:51.
So Edward and Chris, if you're working on this, then please we don't want to have a sort of a sequential commission meeting. Whoever's working on it needs